Welcome back. This is Civil Discourse Now. We take a break between these segments, so I'm not exactly sure where we are at any given point. We're broadcasting to you, we're netcasting you from Big Hat Books, 6510 Cornell, Broad Ripple, Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm Mark Small. My co-host is Paul Ogden. Our guests today are Greg Fettig, who's a Tea Party activist, and Luther Garcia, who's also an Indianapolis attorney, as are Paul and I. We were talking at the end of the last segment. I wanted to also mention the oil. The oil that we got in Iraq, we're not seeing it right now. It's not for us. It's for the corporations that move in and take advantage of the situation. It was like in the Vietnam War. There was a lot of money that was made by corporations just for the fact that that war was fought. It had nothing to do with like going into Vietnam and our country was going to extract resources from them. They had no resources really.
Well, the oil issue isn't the control of the oil. I think the oil issue was the oil companies make the most amount of money when production is ceased or halted by a party that they can't control. The two parties they can't control at this point were Iraq and then Libya. You know, if I was Venezuelan, I'd be quite nervous, frankly. The Bush-Cheney
If you were Venezuela, it'd be larger.
Yeah, the Bush-Cheney administration, or the Cheney-Bush administration, depending on your point of view, their alignment wasn't necessarily with oil production industries. Their alignment and the people that they made their money off of and worked with was the oil services industries. That is the industries that come back and repair destroyed oil systems, build destroyed refineries. No, there is a vested interest in those companies to having these oil fields destroyed and then rebuilt. And rebuilt during a time frame when we control the government or their friends control the government. No, in fact, Cheney had a deferred compensation package. While he was vice president, he was still receiving funds from, I think it was $187 million or some ungodly figure, from Halliburton over a deferred time period. All of which took place while he was still vice president. So,
but it was placed in trust.
Yes.
So, Luther, are you saying that we went into Iraq because of oil interests and private individuals like Cheney wanted to make more money?
Yeah, that's my position. I think that
not the weapons of mass destruction.
I think that was. I think they knew they had all the credible evidence at that time was there weren't any, and everyone who said that there weren't any found themselves either removed or outed. I find it interesting that the whole Valerie Plame thing, that she was the foremost expert on weapons of mass destruction in Iran, which was a lot of rumbling after Iraq. There was a lot of rumbling regarding going after Iran. That, fortunately, seems to have ceased now that we have some serious financial problems. But unfortunately, we've never seen the notes of this energy task force that Cheney had. My understanding was he had a map of Iraq out and had where all the oil fields were. I don't believe this had anything to do with weapons of mass destruction. I think it all had to do with several things. One is Cheney's desire to control the oil system in this world because he's, I believe, a megalomaniac. George Bush Jr.'s desire not to look weak and to look like more of a man than his father and finish the job his dad didn't do.
He's not junior.
He's not junior.
It's George W. Bush.
George W. Bush. I prefer to call him junior. It might be an insulting thing, but I prefer it.
So are you, I'm not going to describe this for you because I highly doubt you have it, but I hear some of the same arguments about 9/11, that was, that it was not fake. I don't think you can argue fake. That we let it happen, and that there were financial interests associated with letting it happen, and that there was politicians who benefited from that.
Were there politicians who benefited from 9/11? Certainly. I mean, the president went from a um, a rating that was remarkably low to incredibly high immediately, just because he was president at the time of this event. I would challenge you to tell me if that was going to be the same thing had Al Gore been the president at the time of 9/11. I mean, my belief is they'd pilloried him from pillar to post, as opposed to everyone who moved behind George W. Bush.
Yeah, but see, I think in August of that year, Al Gore, if he had been president, as he was elected president, if he'd been president, he would have read that memo that said, attention, Al-Qaeda is intending to use airliners in a terrorist attack.
Well, I think to clarify at least my position, do I think that our government, or members in our government, knew that airliners were going to be flown into the World Trade Center, that the World Trade Center was then going to collapse and 3,000 people might possibly lose their lives? No. Do I think that certain members of the administration in late August and early September had a very good reason to believe there would be a terrorist attack of some kind in the United States and chose not to do anything about it because it might further their political goals? Yeah, I do, unfortunately.
See, I'll go halfway in between. I think that they knew and they were just negligent, or they should have known and didn't pay any attention to it because they were doing other things, playing golf, going
but
to the
that
beach.
issue is completely unrelated to bin Laden, his higher goals, and whether he's successful. Unfortunately, our economy, I think, whether or not bin Laden attacks or not, I think that's completely unrelated to our financial.
I don't think so, because I think without the attacks of 9/11, we would not have had a government given a plausible excuse for the massive expenditures on military that followed those attacks. We fought two wars.
I think they were going in, and they were going to find an excuse one way or the other.
But I don't think they would have had the support, especially from other countries, to go into Iraq. They wouldn't have had any reason at all to go into Afghanistan.
Let's bring it.
Well, I mean, again, I don't think we should have been in Iraq to begin with, but some of the things Luther was saying, that's speculation. We're never going to know. We don't know what Al Gore, what he would have done or not, and that's, at this point, neither here nor there. The point is we got into Iraq. Bush did use the UN, the mandates, the goals, and the resolutions that Hussein continuing to violate. So he did go through that channel again. But I'm one that's advocating we shouldn't have been there. But to say it was for oil, I mean, we could say Warren Buffett, he's allied with Obama for his own good. GE that's crony capitalists to the extreme. They don't pay taxes. So, you gotta look at where we are today and saying it's one thing. Both sides have, over the history, last 50, 70 years of this country, both parties have caused things that have been detrimental to this country.
I agree with that. No dispute about that. But I don't believe that anything was on the scale or could have been on the scale of a United States president asking other countries to join in kind of a grand alliance to attack Iraq and go in with the military and overthrow that government fully and completely as we did, and at the same time bombing the hell out of the place and killing a whole bunch of people who were, as the military parlance goes, collateral damage.
I think Greg agreed with you.
Yeah, I think he's in agreement, and unfortunately, I think
you're a key part of it.
I think that if you were to ask the vast majority of the public before Congress took the vote, are you in favor of going into Iraq? I think the vast majority of the public would have said no.
I think the vast majority. I think the vast majority would have said, "Where's Iraq?"
Yeah, but didn't.
Well,
I mean, there was protests all across this country, if I recall, huge ones in some places that didn't get covered at all by any of the press. I mean, enormous. I mean, you would see photographs if you went on the internet of a couple 100,000 people in New York on the streets protesting the Iraq before the resolution for Iraq, but yet the press not covered.
Well, let's make no mistake, though, he did not not just go in it on his own. He did go through Congress, and people voted for it before they voted against it, or vice versa.
Well, that's
that was both parties. They gave them the power to do that.
We need to wind up on this topic, and then we're going to get the end. We do parting shots. Everybody gets 30 seconds. In terms of like wrapping up, but if he's lying to Congress, if he's lying about the facts, and they go along with it, Congress, if it's defrauded into going into a military situation, I don't think you can say, well, they knew about it, they didn't know about it. And that's another thing I think we've got. I have a problem with the War Powers Act. The Constitution says we have to go through a certain process to declare a war, and we don't do that. Yeah, it does. Only Congress has the power. Yeah.
Well, the problem with the whole vote, in my view, was the constituents for most of the senators was 10-1 against. Okay. And they voted for it anyway. That's the problem.
Okay, so the question becomes whether bin Laden achieved his goals. I say he did.
I'd say, yeah.
I'd say not completely.
Partially.
Okay, so we kind of got that on bin Laden. We've had a fairly spirited discussion on that. And we keep putting a lot of issues concerning and nomenclature on it. Let's now go with parting shots. 30 seconds on anything anybody wants to say. Luther? And it starts now.
When this administration took power, they announced essentially that we're not going to investigate or prosecute anyone for any of the activities that happened prior to them taking office. And unfortunately, I think that was a huge mistake. I think that accountability from the top to the very bottom needs to be in every section. The Valerie Plame case, that one just sort of went off to the wayside, and these people continue to crop their heads up again when they are never held accountable.
I didn't want to be accused of being unfair and not enforcing the law. Okay.
Well, what I'd like to say is that every citizen of a free society that we have here in America has an obligation and duty to get involved in politics. Your vote does count, and one person can make a difference. 2.5 years ago, I voted, and that was it. But now I am entertained by congressmen, senators. I can get appointments with just about any of them, only because they see what all of us collectively can do, and both sides. If they're not fair, or respect us, they certainly fear us. So get involved. You have an obligation if you want this country to remain free.
You had that 30 seconds on the button. Paul?
As an attorney, one thing you often do is advise your client there are certain fights that they shouldn't fight. The Republican Party right now is fighting early satellite voting. The reason they said was because of the cost. The UAW stepped in and said that they're willing to contribute $50,000 for the early voting. I'm not in favor of a private entity coming in and doing it, but I think it is something that should be done. Early voting should be permitted at satellite locations. It's simply not a fight that Republicans should enter into, because the cost, the PR cost, is more negative than the gain.
You went way over. I just got to say this about presidential politics. Labor Day was just last week, and I know this is a show in which we're discussing politics and political issues and everything. I think it's a bunch of crap that the presidential election really is run as early as it is. They're announcing the last two candidates for the Republican Party before the year has even begun. I think it's gotten too drawn out. It's like Major League Baseball. They need to bring back double headers and condense the season and not get it so boring. So that's what I have to say. Wherever you are on the planet, thank you for watching Civil Discourse Now. From Big Hat Books in Indianapolis, Indiana. You can buy my book here, Crime Pays, Fictionalized Account of Ponzi Scheme. Thank you very much. I'm Mark Small, Paul Ogden, Luther Garcia, Greg Fettig. Take care. Step aside for a second and I don't mean to go into a tangent or anything, but when you're looking at these nation states, and I think that was what you were starting off saying in the first segment, is that these countries have multiple groups that are dominant in different areas of the countries. and they all have those are political factions, but also cultural factions, religious factions that we don't have here in this country. The same kind of splits.
Not the same kind of splits, not the same potency, I should say, of the splits, the same acidity of the splits. No. In this country, you've got differences between California, New York, or California, New York, and the Midwest. But they don't actively hate each other. They're not actively trying to kill